Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the AskARoofer Minisodes. I'm Lauren White, and I am here with John Kenney. John, thanks for being on again.
Hi, Lauren. Again, thank you again for having me on. I always love being here.
Yeah, so this minisode actually we're pretty sure came from a question that was submitted by a homeowner onto the AskARoofer site, and so now here we are going to be talking about it a little bit more. And it's about visible roof underlayment. Is it normal to be seeing that? So before we dive in, John, why don't I have you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm John Kenney with Cotney Consulting Group. Currently work with contractors across the nation. We're all different items in that, and would love to work in areas like we're doing here, answering questions. I have a 45-year plus background as a roofing contractor, so that's where the expertise comes in. So the question we're going to do here today, I think is fantastic. This question comes up more often than people realize, especially with older homes.
Yeah, so this person who submitted the question, it was a 1916 home, and they realized that there was some underlayment visible inside the attic. So, for other homeowners similar to this one who might find underlayment visible inside the attic, how does that usually indicate, or what does that indicate about the roof decking underneath?
Yeah, so when homeowner sees this roof underlayment kit from the inside of the attic, what it usually means is that the roof was installed over older plank decking with wider gaps and not solid sheathing. So, what I mean by that is when we got into modern roofing, prior to probably the 50s and even almost up to 60s, it was still very, very common that we actually install the roof decking was board plank, like a 1x6, 1x8. They could be all different sizes, 3/4 inch, but they were plank. So like anything else, think of them as a floorboard. When they shrink, as they dry out over the years, they are going to be gapped. So when you see these gaps, that is not necessarily a bad thing. It depends on how wide the gap is. And then in modern times, once we switched over to pretty much all plywood in the marketplace, you didn't have the problem with gaps because of the way they were installed, and the seams were right over usually top of the joists themselves, and they were tight. So it's a little bit different. So when you want to look at this in a modern roof assembly, you should have continuous decking, right? So you shouldn't see this. So if you have plywood and you're seeing this, then there's a problem for sure. So the underlayment and it goes on top of the plywood, and then you have shingles. So seeing the underlayment from below tells us the solid sheathing may be missing and insufficient. But also, I also want you to look at this from the decking plank. That's why it's so important to understand and do your research. A lot of roofing manufacturers won't warranty their roof if the gap is beyond a certain tolerance. Say the gap, they may be content up to, I'm just pulling this out because all manufacturers are different, but say a 1/4 inch wide to a 3/8 inch gap is all that they're going to accept. So I've had this go take this one step further just because it's coming all tied in. Then on top of that, do you have an option? Sure, you would apply decking if this house was structurally strong enough to go over it. So I would definitely ask the questions when you're before you do this. But if you go up and see it, not necessarily, it's not panic mode.
Yeah, well, it's good to know. And so in older homes, similar to this homeowner who submitted the question, when does it make sense to add maybe some new plywood or OSB sheathing during a re-roof, especially after maybe fire or some structural damage?
Sure. So in older homes, especially if you have the fire damage or you have major water damage, interior demolition, if you're trying to do some remodels, then that's probably the right time to upgrade. So adding plywood and OSB over existing boards creates a uniform nailing surface, as we just kind of touched on a little bit before. But the reason why I want you to think about this is it doesn't necessarily have to be done unless I look up in my house and I start to see 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch wide gaps. And also, too, look for knots.
Mm.
Planking usually has the knots in it, very similar that you see in other board type. And if those knots, what happens when they dry out from the heat and it cycles and the weather, they pop out. So if you've got a lot of areas, it absolutely makes sense, regardless of what's going on, to probably put a sheathing over it. So what happens is when you do add the plywood or OSB, depending on the area you're in, the existing boards, over those existing boards, you're going to create a uniform nailing surface. And that's what the shingle manufacturers are looking for. So why is it uniform? Because if you do have these gaps, the installation process becomes more difficult because the nails can actually go between the gaps of the board that are holding the shingles down and not into the wood, which is what you need for uplift. And it brings the roof closer to current code and performance standards. So it's not just about today's roof, it's about setting up the home for the next several decades. So when the time's right, it's right. I've seen homes that are tight tongue and groove plank that would not require this at all. But again, do your homework, look around, see what you have, and bring your contractor in and discuss your options.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important to ask the questions or, you know, ask somebody else, what are the questions I need to be asking this contractor coming in? So, yeah. Well, John, thank you again
Thank you.
for all of your knowledge and insights. And for those of you listening, make sure that you check out John Kenney and Cotney Consulting Group. Their directories are on AskARoofer.com. And be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so that you don't miss another minisode. We'll see you next time.
If your roof needs answers, subscribe now to the Ask a Roofer podcast. We've got your questions covered, one episode at a time. Go to AskARoofer.com to submit your questions and learn more. Stay tuned and keep those questions coming.